Welcome to my video on how I created a 22-inch plaster replica of the 40-foot Last Supper stone wall shown here. I started out with two identical photo printouts of the size of cast that I wanted to make. I then highlighted the grout lines to designate each brick to make. Here I'm cutting the size of the foam form to work with. I needed a thinner piece for the pattern and a thicker one for the bricks. I glued the pattern to the thinner foam board. This will be used to glue and pin the individual foam bricks to. I then pinned the second pattern to the thicker foam and individually scored the foam with an X-Acto knife for each brick. Using a hot wire cutting table, I cut out sections of the scored bricks and then cut each individual brick for that section. Here I'm cutting an individual brick and its height and sculpting the face a bit. I also use sandpaper to give each brick some further texture. I then glued and pinned each cut and sculpted brick to the pattern form. I added color coded for each brick on the pattern to designate the height of each brick as seen here. Here is an example of the next section to cut. Once all the bricks were completed, I cut the entire surrounding thin layer and added full-depth bricks around the entire sculpture to hide the indication of having two levels on the side of the outer bricks. I then glued the entire sculpture to another thick foam board to eventually create a form for casting the mold material. In order to not have deep crevices in the mold, I used craft glue in a syringe and added pseudo grout lines between the bricks. I then smoothed them out with a brush. I eventually covered the entire sculpture with a thin layer of craft glue in order to prevent bubbles from seeping into the mold when pouring it. Here I am showing the grouting half done. When this was completed, I created a form for pouring the mold. Here is the completed form ready for creating the mold. I used BB Dino mold material, which has a 1:1 ratio for mixing. I estimated the required volume for the mold, then measured and mixed the two parts of the BB Dino liquids and poured it over the form and let it sit until cured. After letting the mold set, I had to remove parts of the form sides to release the mold. I estimated how much plaster material I needed for the sculpture. I used perfect cast for the pour. I sprayed the mold with a mixture of water and dish soap as a release agent prior to pouring the plaster. After letting the plaster set and cool, I removed it from the mold. Prior to painting, I cleaned up the plaster and filled any holes created by bubbles. I then painted the entire piece with a light gray base coat. Then, using a darker gray, I filled in the grout lines and wiped away any excess paint, which gave it a weathered stone look. The highest bricks on the background were painted white. Using various shades of white, gray, ochre, cream, and brown colors, I continued to paint the figures within the sculptures. In the last coat of paint, I used a scrubby-looking brush to give it a stone look to the bricks. I took a photo of the original silver door on the chest of Jesus and miniaturized it, printed it out, and then decoupaged it on the door. All in all, it took 60 hours to create the original foam plaque and mold, and it took about 10 hours to cast and paint one. Thanks for watching.